right, Libby, so I want to start with critical race theory because I know you write about this a lot. You recently wrote about the U.S. Air Force, but I want to play this cut for you and my listeners because it seems like now we've reached a new stage in the Democrats' fight against critical race theory, and that stage would be, name-calling and smearing Republicans as crazy people. This is Joy Reid, who has been very, very on the defense for critical race theory, although she, as you point out a lot, Libby, she can't really define it, and a lot of liberals can't define it in terms that we can argue with, because it seems to be this, ever-evolving theory. But let's play Joy Reid on...
It's so weird, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw that yesterday someone tweeted this at you and just said, it's hard to have a debate about something that they won't give us a definition on.
Yeah, they just keep changing it.
Right. So let's listen to Joy Reid. She's talking about parents who are fighting critical race theory, and then I want to get your reaction, Libby. Cut 11, please, Jared.
In the wake of the disgraced, twice impeached president's defeat, that hysteria over the perceived encroachment of race-conscious education is being exploited by another insidious force, followers of QAnon, who are now using the battle cry to similarly target school boards, with many who have espoused QAnon's theories now melding their own conspiracies with the lies about critical race theory. This nexus now between this fake version of critical race theory that is freaking people out at school boards and QAnon.
Now, Libby, are most parents, and this is mobilizing parents across the country, are most parents getting their information about critical race theory from QAnon, in your opinion?
No, I would say directly and fully that they are not. That's not where they're getting their information. Parents are getting information from each other. They're talking about these things. They're meeting online. They're discussing it. They're not discussing it with QAnon. They're discussing it with each other. The parents I've talked to in Westchester County, New York, very liberal stronghold, started out with, concerns about, and this is something Joy Reid brings up, they started out with concerns about remote school and that being damaging for their kids, concerns about the masking during PE class specifically and that being bad for their kids. And these are concerns that parents have as parents, not as political activists. The parents who are going out there and going to school board meetings and figuring out how to make their voices heard are doing so out of necessity, not because they're being backed by conservative think tanks or pushed to do so by QAnon, conspiracy theorists. They're doing it because they care about their kids, and they're not willing to let school boards, who basically have these sinecures, and nobody ever goes out for a school board election. When was the last time anyone voted for a school board that you remember? It's Tuesday, the school board election. Let me hurry on out there. People barely vote in the big elections, never mind the small ones. So parents are going out and making these changes, taking these stands because they want their kids to get a proper education. And that's why they're doing it. Joy Reid's latest way to discredit these parents and their activism is to do what the progressive left is always doing, which is to just say that everyone's a bunch of racist, crazy people and they shouldn't be listened to. And when we look at what's going on in education from the schools in New York City that are, teaching first graders about, concepts that probably don't belong in first grade in terms of sex ed concepts, when we look at the race essentialist education that's going on, it's no wonder that parents are taking a stand and looking out for their kids. And if they have to unseat school board members, so be it. This is a democracy, and that's what we get to do. It's actually appalling when you listen to that Joy Reid interview with Ben Collins, who wrote about this with I think Brandy Zadrozny, also at NBC, and they were saying, parents aren't really advocating for this. They're just being used as pawns by conservative think tanks, and Christopher Rufo and the Manhattan Institute. And it's just appalling that this is the only way they can think of to try and maintain this weird cultural bias in educational institutions.
Yeah, and
what is their motive?
I think that this line of attack, I think they've fallen into this now of trying to smear parents and discredit them and mock them. But the original way, I'm guessing that the Joy Reids and, the Chris Hayeses thought they were going to end this was just by sheer confusion. And I want to talk about that a little bit because the liberals have a great spot to be in with a critical race theory in the sense that a lot of what they're trying to argue, if you say, well, this is what it is, they'll immediately turn around and go, oh, you don't understand it, or that's not what it is, or where did you hear that? But they don't ever define it. And you wrote an article for the Post Millennial about the U.S. Air Force and how they originally said they weren't teaching critical race theory. And then they go and say, oh, we're proud to be teaching it. We see this everywhere. Randy Weingarten, the head of the second largest teachers union, AFT, says, oh, we're not teaching critical race theory. That's not taught K through 12. And then she says, but we're creating a legal defense for teachers if they decide to teach that. So it's kind of like this. We can't fight something that can't be defined.
Yeah, and that's really what's going on. And I think you hit it right on the head there because they don't want to define it. As soon as they define it, we can attack it and say, here are the reasons why this thing that you are advocating for is divisive and bad for our kids. But if they keep it vague, if they say that it's, first they said it was just for law schools, and then they said, well, actually, maybe it's for these other things, but actually, that's not critical race theory. That's some other kind of thing. That's, like, what was it that Joy Reid said this morning? I don't even remember exactly what she said. But she was like, it's a race-based educational model.
Right. They're teaching. I saw it today, Libby. I can't think of the publication. It was probably the Washington Post or maybe New York Times. Said, they're teaching racism. And I think it was David Marcus said, that's a strange way to phrase it. But they'll say, oh, it goes from being a law theory or a legal theory that you only learn in law school. And then it changes into, well, they're just teaching actual history and they're teaching about slavery and they're teaching about Juneteenth, which those two things, they're not the same. It's either one or the other.
No, they're not. They're not at all. And we live in a very large country. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I learned more American history about the Revolutionary War that happened in Boston than literally any other American history at all, And when I moved to Philadelphia, it turned out that I ended up learning all about the American Revolution in a Philadelphia-centric fashion. And then I learned about the Constitution and all of that, like the forming of the Constitution and everything. So we have, I think, in this country, a regional-based educational strategy with regard to history. So nobody, even President Biden, didn't know what Juneteenth was, I think, a year ago. That's a Texas thing. And it's interesting and it's great that we should all know about it. But it's not the same as learning about, the history and the legacy of slavery, which we all learn about. I can't think of a year of study that I had in school from elementary school through the end of high school where we didn't discuss slavery, where we didn't talk about that. We learned about the, Trail of Tears under Andrew Jackson. We learned about all of these things. So when you hear the progressive left start telling us that nobody's learning this stuff, it's as though they think we're just learning that George Washington was some great individual with no flaws. It's as though they think we're learning that, slavery was a bunch of happy people. We're not learning that. And all of these people went to school, and they learned about the horrors that have happened in our nation. We all learn that. But it can't be the only thing we learn. And it can't be that we teach our children that they are responsible for the sins of their ancestors. That's one of the greatest principles that the U.S. was founded on, is that we're not, responsible for what our grandparents did wrong. That's not on us, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be oppressed because of our grandparents, and we shouldn't be responsible for their actions.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And in the minds of these mainstream media, talking heads, I think Joy Reid had said we learn a Daughters of the Confederacy history. And like you said, that's just not true. Libby, I do want to switch gears here for 1 second, because on the Post Millennial, you published a piece, which I heard this audio today and I found it pretty amazing. Now, this is Kash Patel, and he is talking. He is the he was a former Pentagon official. Listen to this sound, Libby, and then I want you to explain to my audience why this is so important. I was kind of amazed by this. This is cut 7. He's talking about January 6th.
And if you look at the video from January 6th, and they still won't release all of it, an entire side of the Capitol, I believe it's the south side, was totally unmanned. No police officers whatsoever. And that's where the crowd first came in through. And you have to ask yourself, what happened on January 6th? Now, look, I was chief of staff of the Department of Defense on the 6th. We had offered the Capitol Police and Mayor Bowser of Washington, D.C., thousands of National Guardsmen and women 2 days before January 6th, and they turned us down. So it could have been prevented.
Now, Libby, do you think any of that would be investigated in Nancy Pelosi's January 6th commission? Because I do have a lot of questions about January 6th, but I don't think they're the questions that are going to be asked by the Democrats.
I agree with you there, and I think that's sort of a big problem. The Democrats clearly want to elevate this day of January 6th as the most horrible thing that's ever happened in United States history, and perhaps they should go back to school and learn a little something, because there are an awful lot of worse things that have happened in our nation other than this afternoon riot in Washington. I think what Kash Patel said is really fascinating when you think about the perspective that people had of the Trump administration. So anything they offered, anything they suggested was immediately dismissed as the wrong thing. It was a classic case of, if you don't like the guy who's saying it, you assume that everything he says is incorrect. And now they are, they blame Trump, they blame the administration, they blame Republicans for all of this. And if it's true that the National Guard was offered and was denied, I think that's a big deal. And I wonder what Pelosi would have to say about that. Who turned them down? Who was in charge of the Capitol Police and said, no, we don't want that? Mayor Bowser, we know, has denied Trump's help over and over again, as have so many Democratic mayors of our major cities. But what does that say about this commission? I don't think that that's what they want to address. I think what they want to address are their fears. I think they want to talk about Andy Kim's blue suit. I think they want to talk about their own bravery hiding under desks and how difficult it was to be evacuated from buildings next door. When you watch this and you watch the way they behave with this, it becomes harder and harder to believe their perspective on anything.
Yeah. I totally agree. Libby, we got to end it there, but I always love having you on. Everyone can follow Libby on Twitter at Libby Emmons, Emmons. She also writes for the Post Millennial, the Federalist, New York Post. All of her stuff is awesome, and she keeps you up to date on all of the woke craziness going on. So make sure you check that out. Thanks for coming on, Libby. Eden Pure has brought back their famous buy one, get one free sale on their most popular product, the Thunderstorm Air Purifier. With over 100,000 sold and counting, the Thunderstorm is slated to sell out again. My listeners rave about how well it works to get rid of odors and freshen the air. It starts working in minutes to cleanse the air in your home, and it helps you start breathing better. Isn't that right, Jared?
Yes, I have seasonal allergies, which last all year. But as soon as I plug in the Eden Pure Thunderstorm, and that's all you need to do. You just need to plug it into a wall outlet. You don't need to change filters. You don't need to lug extension cords, heavy equipment, nothing. You just plug it in, you turn it on, and within minutes, literally within minutes, you are breathing clean air because the air around you gets ionized and it creates a super oxygen, and that has been great for me during this allergy season.
And it's also great to get rid of odors, and if it does not work, if you don't think it works for you, then you will get your money back, so you have nothing to lose. They're offering a BOGO sale to my listeners until this Sunday. That's buy one, get one free. So here's what you want to do. Go to EdenPureDeals.com, click on my name, and put in code GraceBOGO at checkout. That's EdenPureDeals.com, code word GraceBOGO. The offer ends this Sunday, July 11th, so act fast. We'll be back on the other side with more. This is The Grace Curley Show.
You're listening to The Grace Curley Show.
This